Salutations, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am on Barton Street, London, outside the house of T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia. So, who was this T.E. Lawrence? Well, he's best known for being a British army officer who assisted the Arab revolt in the First World War, and he had a most colourful background. He was born in Wales to an Irish father and a Scots mother. His father's name was actually Sir Thomas Chapman, so he was an Irish aristocrat who'd been to Eton and Oxford. So Sir Thomas was married, he had 3 daughters, and then he very unfortunately fell in love with their governess, and he eloped with the governess and went on to have 4 sons with her, including T.E. Lawrence. So the governess was a zealous Christian and was very conflicted about her relationship with Chapman and felt terribly sinful about it. Anyway, they moved to Oxford and lived under the assumed name of Lawrence at Polstead Road. You can still see the very handsome townhouse where they resided. But that dwelling place was nothing as compared to the family seat in County Meath in Ireland, where Chapman's wife and 3 daughters remained. I'm not sure how he was not able to control most of the finances, but he lived in reduced circumstances because he had been very wealthy and was just upper middle class in Oxford. Now, if he wanted to go incognito, Oxford is perhaps the worst place he could move to, because being an Oldtonian and on a graduate Oxford University, he was more likely to bump into somebody who knew him there than anywhere else. Anyway, the Lawrences maintain this pretense. And T.E. Lawrence, he later became aware of his true identity and the fact his parents weren't actually married, which of course in the Edwardian era was regarded as an absolute scandal. Anyway, he went to Oxford High School for Boys, no longer exists now, it's a library. And then he went to Jesus College, Oxford. So he read classics, but he did quite a lot of archaeology, was fascinated by the Near East in the ancient times. He cycled all the way across France, studying castles, went to what's now Syria, Jordan, Palestine, studying Crusader castles. And he was a fellow of all sales. He was an outstanding intellectual. He mastered Arabic. First World War came along and he volunteered for service. He was sent to Egypt. So the First World War was going badly for the Allies, a slogging match on the Western Front. So Lloyd George's idea was to knock away the props, that the Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria, Austria-Hungary, that they were propping up Germany, and if they could be defeated, that would bring Germany down. Other people say, no, we're Westerners, not Easterners in this conflict. That's a distraction, it's a sideshow. The war will be fought and must be won or lost on the Western Front. Anyway, T.E. Lawrence was sent into Arabia. The Hejaz and the Asir, and indeed Al-Hassa, the coast of Saudi Arabia, then part of the Ottoman Empire. So some Arabs there had revolted against the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was much of the Middle East, its capital Istanbul, Turkish was the official language, Sunni Islam was the state religion. But so the Hashemites were the dominant tribe of the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, custodians of the 2 holy mosques of Mecca and Medina. So T.E. Lawrence went along, and the Hashemites had largely succeeded already. They'd taken everything except Medina. They chose not to storm Medina because they calculated it was better for them to keep the Ottoman garrison there, still trying to be supplied by railway, just raid the railway, and it was bleeding the Ottomans white. It was more costly for the Ottomans to try and keep the garrison at Medina going. But anyway, T.E. Lawrence, he led the attack on Aqaba, then the Royal Navy could supply the Arab revolt by ship and led them up through what's now Palestine into Syria, taking cities such as, Damascus in the end. Notoriously, he was captured at Dera'a, unarmed, and they thought he was a deserter from the army. He suffered some sort of abuse, possibly rape. He was a very odd fish, T.E. Lawrence. He never married. He's known to have had at least one homosexual liaison, not suggesting there's anything wrong with that, but he was a bit of a masochist. So then the First World War was over, and he felt guilty about it because there's been the Hussein McMahon correspondence, a British diplomat, had been writing to one of the Hashemite princes, suggesting that there would be an independent Arab kingdom, whereas the British government was also in contact with Chaim Weizmann, a Zionist leader, with the Balfour Declaration. So it seemed that they'd sold the same camel twice. It was a Sykes-Picot agreement about which parts of the Middle East, France and the United Kingdom were to rule. Anyway, T.E. Lawrence, he was there at the Paris Peace Conferences 1919, when some of this was thrashed out. So he came back here, he left the army. He'd been turned into a star because As I say, the war had been going dismally for the Western Allies in 1916, and finally the Arab result was a success story, even though it wasn't terribly strategically important. There was at least some good news to tell the public to keep flagging spirits up. And what really made Lawrence famous was also an American photographer, Lowell, taking photos of him in Arab dress. So T.E. Lawrence, he Arabized himself in everything except faith. Now, it's true there are Christian Arabs, but he really lived the Arab lifestyle, and he did not like Arabs who were too westernized. So he returned here, and he became best known as a writer, writing The Seven Pillars of Wisdom and indeed Revolt in the Desert. He managed to lose one of them, the entire manuscript in Reading railway station, but rewrote the whole thing. So they are literary masterpieces, and it's The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, which begins, "The heat of Arabia came out to meet me like a drawn sword." There he's recalling when he arrived at Yanbo by ship, this port on the east coast of Arabia. So he was lionized by the public. He decided he wanted to become anonymous again. He assumed the surname Shaw. He joined the RAF briefly. He was exposed again, and he later joined the Royal Tank Regiment, served in India, is now Pakistan. But he was out of the army, and in 1936 he was living in the West Country in a cottage and riding his motorcycle without a helmet. He saw two old ladies on their bicycles. He swerved to avoid them, swerved too much, went into a ditch, and indeed died. He had been going to meet someone, I think the very next day. If I'm not wrong, it was Sir Oswald Mosley. So he had a funeral in St Paul's Cathedral and was held in very high regards by many. Churchill felt that his loss was very grievous because should another war come, T.E. Lawrence was exactly the sort of person they should meet. So he's an absolutely scintillating character. You may have seen the David Lean film from 1962, Lawrence of Arabia. There are people think he's rather mythologized, and actually the Arabs did it for themselves. Moreover, there were several other British and French officers who helped the Arab revolt, but for some reason his role is hugely overplayed. But he is a most scintillating character and really worth finding out more about if you're remotely curious about the Middle East.